Welcome to the Balanced Badass Podcast, the show for multitaskers determined to stay balanced and badass without losing their minds. Every week, we help you manage your overflowing calendar and household, making sure you still have time to breathe, laugh, and savor that much-needed glass of wine at the end of the day. Think of this podcast as your weekly dose of practical advice, humor, and tough love, just like catching up with a friend who really gets it. I'm Tara Kermit, your personal growth coach, helping you handle how was your day without a meltdown. Now let's get into today's episode. All right. Hey there, and welcome back to the Balanced Badass Podcast. I'm Tara, your host and fellow human, trying to navigate this whole wild world of work-life balance without totally losing it. Today, I've got a treat for you. We are talking all about how to keep burnout at bay while building workplaces that actually work for leaders and also for their teams. My guest is the amazing Kirsten Zeigler, founder of KDZ HR Consulting. Kirsten is an HR pro who helps female identifying founders tackle hiring, create equitable workplaces, and survive those inevitable growing pains that we all know exist and maybe know and love or know and hate, depending on the day. We're going to get into everything from how leaders can avoid burnout and set a good example for their teams to practical ways that employees can manage their energy. So I want to just jump right into it and say welcome to the podcast, Kirsten.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Yes. So just for the listeners, Kirsten and I just got to know each other about 15 minutes ago, but I feel like we are already fast friends. So really excited to see where our conversation goes today. And just so you know, Kirsten, I start every guest interview with an icebreaker question, and it's the same question. And so I want to ask you, what's something that you're just loving in your life right now?
Ooh, I am loving the holiday season right now.
Amen to that.
I am focused on joy to the point where I'm like almost forcing it down my throat in a way. I have like Christmas lights and tinsel all over the place. I am just really leaning in
I love it.
to that. So
I love it. I feel like you have to binge it because it only comes although it should come out year round, but it only comes in this short sprint of time. So you have to binge it as much as you can.
definitely. And I'm in New Jersey, so we're, right now it's been gloomy and dark and raining, and we're just going to get into that winter. And, I'm taking every opportunity I can to bring all the sparkles into my home.
I feel that. I grew up in Pennsylvania, like I was telling you earlier, and just the season of gray from
Yeah.
October to March, April
It's
really
tough.
bummed me out most of the
Yeah.
time.
Oh, I have a happy light. I have
Oh yeah,
all the
you gotta.
tools. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anytime you want to come to the beach, we have sunshine most days. So
Thank
come on
you.
down.
You may regret that. Come
Absolutely not.
February.
We love having guests.
Like, hey, remember me?
Yeah, we got a guest room. It's all yours, girl.
Thank you.
All right. Well, let's get into it. So, you help female identifying founders build equitable workplaces and navigate those growing pains like we talked about in the intro. And that really hit home for me because that's something that I'm super passionate about too as a female identifying individual, but also really focused on building those equitable environments and cultures. So I'm just curious, what inspired you to focus your work on that specific mission? And maybe what have been some of your biggest lessons along the way?
Great question. So I've been in HR for almost 13 years at this point. I fell into it as most people do. I didn't know it was a thing. I went to school for art, and all of a sudden I'm managing people in a retail store and realizing, oh, this is a whole job. So that's how I started my career in HR. But I went out on my own 2 years ago. So I was in the corporate world for about 10 years. I worked for tech startups. I worked in healthcare services. I worked for an art gallery. I really changed industries because that's what kept it interesting to me. But everywhere I went, I really was just so disappointed in the environments I was a part of, um, and found myself being kind of forced in situations that really made me uncomfortable and like didn't align with my own values. Like I got into HR because I love people, but I'm really big on like ethics and fairness. And I've always, like, those have always been things that really resonate with me. And it wasn't always like that in corporate America, you
Yeah.
know? And so, and when you are working in a company, your job is on the line if you aren't doing what you're being directed to do. So I really just felt twisted and uncomfortable. And so I had an experience at a company and I was let go because I was giving my honest and truthful opinions about, how to treat people, how to run a team. That the owner was like, I don't want that information. I want to do what I want to do.
Mm.
Um, and I was just so fed up by that point and was like, that's it. I'm starting my own business. I want to be selective on who I work with. Like
Mm.
I work with a variety of industries because what I find is that yes, there are nuances for each type of business, each industry, but people are people. If you're dealing with people, you're going to have similar problems, right? And similar challenges. And so for me, it was about finding leaders that want to build teams that reflect their own personal values, that treat people well, that treat people like people and not just numbers or workers.
Mhm.
And so that's what really pushed me and led me to, doing the work I do. And, the piece about working with like female identifying founders is that it was still in the year of almost 2025, women are still so underserved. And truly, in my experience, are some of the greatest leaders, right?
Mm.
Like they lead with intellect, but also compassion. And that is something that, in my experience, I just wasn't finding with some of the male founders I was working with. And so
Yeah.
that's what really led me on this mission.
Yeah. You and I have very similar stories. While I don't work in HR, obviously, but like I too was working for an organization that values just were not aligned in a lot of ways. And like, you kind of notice it, like the discomfort there at first. Maybe at least for me, like I brushed it aside, like, oh, I can get over
Yeah.
this. Like this is fine. But it became to the point where like my core values that are my personal values, but also my professional and workplace values were being compromised in a lot of ways. Like
Hmm.
integrity is a huge one. And you mentioned that as kind of a piece of
Yeah.
that. And like one of my favorite sayings, and I think I mentioned this probably in one episode already, but like one of my favorite sayings from a mentor of mine is that integrity is not a part-time job. And
I
like
love that.
I kept hearing that like in the back of my mind as I was like starting to question and feel the heaviness. So yeah, so I think, one, I appreciate that you shared that piece because it just goes to show that it's not uncommon for folks to have this kind
Not
of
at all.
back and forth.
Yeah, definitely. And I will say I do think, like, for me, I was in a place in my life and my career where I was, unfortunately let go, but also that kind of forced my hand into figuring out what's the next step, right? And I was in a
Mhm.
place where I was like, I need to try to make this work for myself. That's not always, that's a luxury, right? Like
Right.
that's not always something you can say, I need to find a new job and it has to align with my values. Sometimes I mean, everybody's been in the position where we've been in places that don't align with us. But I mean, my advice is that, like, you have to come up with your non-negotiables, right? Like,
Mhm.
is the salary the non-negotiable? That's fine, right? Maybe your values are taking a back seat at the time, but just that doesn't mean, like, don't stay there. Don't become comfortable there then.
Mhm.
You want your job to align with who you are and what you're good at because that will be the most beneficial for you and honestly, and the company, right? Like when a
Right.
company has people that are aligned with the mission, the vision, the values, then they're going to thrive too. So it's better for
Hmm.
everybody. But, if you have to take jobs for other reasons, just don't forget what your ultimate goal is and what your ultimate mission is.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great message to share with the listeners because I too like talk all the time. Like, not everyone has the opportunity to leave a role, or not
Yeah,
everyone has a say in whether they leave the role or not, hence layoffs.
absolutely.
Um, but you always have control over what's important to you. And there's typically always a way to find something that you can kind of bring back the reins on. It may be something very small and minuscule, but it may help you at least sustain until you find the right time, the right season, the right opportunity that comes along. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. It's definitely a hard place to be in, but also it's a great opportunity to really reflect and figure out what's important and think about the season of your life. Like, there were times where for me, like, the benefits were the primary factor into why I accepted a job, because I needed those benefits at that time and season in my life. Similar to you, like, I luckily didn't, well, I don't know if I say luckily, because honestly, some days I wish I would have gotten laid off because there would have been opportunities there. But, I survived a
Yeah.
round of layoffs, but I had the support from my husband to be able to leave on my own terms. And I
Yeah.
know that that is a privilege. And like you said, that's a luxury that not everybody has. And I, every day, am thankful for that. Like, there are
Yeah.
many days I call him my Splenda daddy because, it's like sugar light. We're not rolling in the dough here,
Splenda. I love
but
that so much.
I will thank him for being my Splenda daddy.
I love that.
So,
That is so
anyways,
good.
yeah, maybe we'll trademark that someday. Put it on a
Yeah,
t-shirt.
I think you should. I really think you should. I haven't heard that before and I really like it. So
Yeah, it's really good. People get confused. They're like, Splenda Daddy? I was like, well, we ain't got no sugar here. Like, we might even be not even Splenda. Like, we might just be the generic, like, sweetener, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyways, so another question that I have for you, because you brought up the point about female founders often having such a great intellect, but also heart, and being able to kind of lead both from your brains and your gut almost.
Yeah.
But, I'm finding in my research with burnout that those that identify as women are often more likely to experience burnout. And my assumption as I, dig into the research further is because we're doing all the things and leading from all the ways. So I'm curious, from your perspective and from the work that you do, like, what are some practical steps that leaders can take to really manage their own energy, but also model that healthier kind of work-life balance work approach for their teams?
I think that, first of all, this is such a big struggle for
Hmm.
leaders, not just to do it for themselves, but sometimes they don't realize that by practicing these bad behaviors, they are modeling it for their team. So I love that
Right.
you said that. Um, I think it honestly starts with learning more about themselves, right? And so figuring out like, let's say you have your own business, right? So you have the flexibility and you lead a team. What times of the day are you the most productive, right? Like, so
Mm.
for me personally, I've found that first thing in the morning is when I need to write blog posts, do like employee handbooks, like really focus on that, like thoughtful, intense, maybe like build something new. And then midday, I like to talk. Like, I need that human interaction. Around 3 p.m., my brain turns to mush and I
Same.
need to step away. Yeah, it happens to a lot of people, actually, the more I
Hmm.
talk about this. But I need to step away, take the dog for a walk, work out, clean, do something fun. Who cares? Take a break. And then sometimes I'll come back and do more thoughtful stuff around like 5:30. Like,
Hmm.
when the sun is setting for me, I can't focus. I need it to be light out or dark out for some
Yeah.
reason. So I think that, even if you're stuck in a position that maybe you're more time bound, like a more traditional 9 to 5, finding out, like spending time with yourself and figuring out what types of things work for you for different parts of the day. So that's number one, I think, because I think that you have to help manage your own energy. Also, determining what gives you energy
Mm.
versus what drains you. Because I know there's a lot of things I do during the day, even though I have full control over my own life. I'm a solopreneur. There are a lot of things that drain me, right? And so I
Right.
need to balance those out with things that recharge me. So
Mm.
figuring out what those pieces are for yourself and creating a schedule, right? Block out your calendar to say, I have to do these annoying tasks for an hour, but immediately after that, I'm going to have a conversation with XYZ, right? Like maybe it's people that give you energy, or I'm going to do some heads down stuff because maybe focusing is the thing that gives you energy. What is it that really like fills your cup? Make sure to spread that out. Don't put that all in one day. Because
Your
then
cup will overfloweth.
your cup will overflow. You'll have a great day and then you will hate the rest of your week.
Hmm.
So those are some things you can do for yourself. Um, I think that modeling good behaviors when it comes to time off and logging off are really important too. So if you're the
Hmm.
type of leader, and listen, there are some people out there that are like, no, I'm on 24/7. I expect my people to be on 24/7. There are jobs like that. There are workplaces like that. And if that is what your business needs, then you need to find the right people that operate that same way. There's nothing wrong with that, right? It just needs to be clearly communicated. But, let's say you're a business owner that, really values work-life balance and that's what you preach, that's what you want your team to have and you want that for yourself, then you need to start putting tools into practice so that you can have work-life balance so that your team sees that good example. So, take time off. Take time off. I know
Mm.
there's a
Preach.
busy business happening, but you need time off to recharge. I don't listen to my own advice. I've only recently I took a week, went on a business retreat, and it was the best decision I've ever made for
Mm.
myself. And that really, sometimes you don't listen to yourself. So
Yeah. It's easy to give
guilty, right?
advice.
Absolutely, absolutely. But when you're out of office and you have a team, determine what are the rules of communication when you're out of office. What is an emergency
Mm.
versus what's not an emergency? Maybe you set like if you're the type of person that's like, no, I can't fully disconnect, right? Maybe you set a time. I'm going to check my email at 10 a.m. every day I'm out, or I'm going to check my email once at this time on this day, right? So if there's anything urgent, put it in the subject line. Maybe you're like, you know what? I'm staying out of my inbox because I don't want you to sit there scrolling on your time off, right? Like,
Hmm.
so you're out of your inbox. You say to your team, this is what an emergency is. Text me, call me, right? So you're not spending your time looking for things to solve. Um, though like I really just think like you need to set yourself up for success. And so if you're saying that about yourself, allow your team that time off. Don't bother them. Don't email them,
Mm.
right? Maybe there are things that you need to send them via email. Maybe you could set that to be scheduled to send, for the day they come back. Even with like working hours too. Let's say you're the type of leader that like needs to catch up on things at 9 p.m., that's fine for you because that's how you work. But make sure your team knows that there is zero expectation of them looking, checking, responding until a certain time the next day. Maybe you have people that just, want are people pleasers and like want to be schedule that send. Like scheduling send is my favorite thing.
Yes. It was the best thing that was ever created.
Absolutely. I know I do that for my clients where I'm like, I don't, if they respond to me, I'm not responding back. So let me just send this tomorrow.
Mhm.
And then I schedule this in. So I really think it's about determining, what the rules of engagement are for time off, what the expectations are for you as a leader, and also like letting your team know what the expectations are so that there's no question, so that they don't feel insecure about logging off, taking time off. What does done look like during the day, right?
Mm,
Sometimes maybe your team members need to complete a few things before the end of the day. Let them know what needs to be done by the end of the day so that they can log off and not have to worry about it. Remote work is like the best and worst thing that's ever happened to us, right?
yeah.
Because we're able to be more flexible with how, where, when we work, but also we're always on in one way or another. So maybe it's setting do not disturb for periods of time. I know I do that. I've gotten into the habit of doing that all the time now, where I have different do not disturb setup, and again, what is an emergency should something happen while you're in
Mhm.
that like blackout mode. So I know it's hard. It's a lot about setting your own boundaries, right? I think that sometimes it's easier to think, I'm a leader, I have a team. I can't do this, but think of it as doing it for not only yourself, but for your team. Sometimes it's easier to think about doing it for other people.
Yeah. I think that's a great point, especially for anyone that is a people pleaser out there. Like, I don't want to condone the people pleasing conviction necessarily or support that, because I am a recovering people pleaser and perfectionist
Same,
myself. Um,
same.
and it
I
can
see
definitely
you.
be like a dangerous spiral. But I think a lot of that people pleasing comes from the care that you have for others. And if you channel that care, like you said, into you are modeling ways to show care for your employees and for your team to be able to see what care looks like for themselves too. Cause like self care isn't just bubble baths and,
No,
shopping sprees and getting your nails done. Like self care genuinely is about these things that you mentioned, like setting those boundaries, knowing what your energy looks like all that kind of stuff. There was so many good gems. So I hope folks like rewind and re-listen to a lot of those things, because those are things that I share all the time too. One thing that I saw as like a theme that you were saying mostly is that communication is so important when it comes to kind of
everything.
modeling this behavior. Yeah, everything. Um, but modeling this behavior, and I don't, I'm like obsessed, like fangirl over Brene Brown. So let's just go with that. And she always says like communication is a form of care, and, you know, clarity is kind. So like that is really important, especially because like setting boundaries can feel scary and icky and cringe in some ways. But if you think about it more as I'm setting this to show care, I'm setting this to be kind to my team, at least for
Yeah.
me, like that really helped me with. I am like a boundary girl now. Like I used to not have them. I worked in residence life and higher ed. So I lived where I worked,
Oh
and that
boy.
was an experience
I'm sure.
that I will never do again. But lesson learned. But you talked about what's urgent, what's not, like how do you communicate with me depending on the different circumstances. That was something that I had to learn the hard way in working with student resident advisors. So that was my team at the time. I was leading a team of 29 RAs. So I had
Whoa.
29 students that were also learning how to discern what is important, what can wait. And we did a lot of conversation around, okay, like if you reach out to me whenever something comes to your plate and comes to your table, if I respond within 30 minutes, is anything going to change? Or if we wait 24 hours, is that going to
Yeah.
be okay? Like, what's going to be the difference here? Like, if somebody's arm is falling off, call me.
Right.
If,
That's an emergency.
if the roommates are fighting over soup, like,
Yeah.
that can wait until tomorrow. Like,
Right.
and then from there, then you can discern, like, okay, do you call me? Do you text me? Do you email me? Like all that
Mhm.
kind of stuff. So like a lot of that just hit home with me. But you have to learn these things along the way and kind of like test what's going to work for you too.
Definitely, and spend some time with yourself to understand, how do I best receive information?
Mm-hmm.
And, like, everyone is different, right? With how they communicate, how they want to be communicated with. So
Mm-hmm.
learning that about yourself and learning that about your team members is really helpful, not just with tackling things like burnout and leadership, but also just day-to-day business
Right.
operations.
Right. That's what like most of my work is focused on just getting to know people. That's why I love what I do. Cause like I just get to know you and then we just figure
Yeah.
out kind of what's going to work. So,
Yeah.
um, and I think that's why, for me that I have felt confident in leadership roles because I see leadership as a relational process. So the more that I can
Yeah.
relate to another individual, the better leader I'm going to be ultimately. And like you said, like it's not just for you, it's for your team, it's to model that behavior, and it shows such a sense of care that will not go unnoticed. I think
Yeah.
employees notice when you don't care and they notice when you care and they know the difference of what that feels like.
Absolutely. I
Hmm.
couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about equity in action. So I'm curious, just from your perspective, especially knowing your background and just all the different industries that you have worked with, what does an equitable workplace look like in practice? And maybe what are some steps that leaders can consider taking in order to build one if that's a value
Yeah.
of theirs?
Honestly, okay, so one of the things that I love that's come about in the past few years, from like a state level, are pay transparency
Oh,
laws.
yes.
And I'm a big fan, big
Hmm.
fan. And I do think, like, obviously this helps employees, job seekers, but I also think it helps businesses.
Hmm.
Like, I know a lot of times people can see this as just like a pain to the business and a benefit to the employee, but I totally disagree with that. New Jersey, the great state of New Jersey, where I reside, we are passing ours in 2025, so we'll have pay transparency laws. Currently, Jersey City is the only place in New Jersey that has that. Fun fact. But I think there are 14 states at this point that have pay transparency laws, and those require good faith salary ranges in job descriptions. And then
Hmm.
also, if employees inquire about pay or salary ranges for, different jobs, you have to disclose those salary ranges. So I think that forces businesses to be very thoughtful
Hmm.
about compensation and making sure that their team is paid fair and equitably. So to me, this is one of those things that's really helpful.
Hmm.
Sometimes compliance things are passed and you're like, "Ooh, this is a bummer." But this to me is a great thing, and I think it helps businesses put fair compensation practices into place, and it allows thoughtful conversation to happen. It allows employees to understand where they are in the ranges and why, and what
Hmm.
their potential is in their current role or in other roles. So to me, that is the best place to start.
Yeah.
Compensation, right? And then even like when it comes to hiring, I mean, really, it all starts at hiring because that's when you're coming up with these ranges, but then also determining what the absolute needs are for the role you're hiring for. And I say this all the time, but there are so many roles that don't require a college degree. I think that it's something that people just put on there at this point to check a box. It
Mm.
is not needed for a lot of jobs. So I want businesses to be very thoughtful, because you're opening, if you don't include, the less barriers you have for roles, the more inclusive your hiring practice will be and your team will be, because what you're really looking for, not culture fit, you want culture add. You
Mm.
want to hire people that add to your business, that don't just fill a slot and be. You want someone to bring new perspectives, new ideas, and share your values. That's where, the fit is, but the ad is what they're bringing to the table. So by removing some barriers from what you're looking for in hiring, you can also really open up the talent pool, which I think is an
Mhm.
absolute incredible way to really start creating fair and equitable teams.
Yeah.
And then
I
also making sure, oh, sorry.
No, I was
What were
just
you
gonna
gonna
say,
say?
I love the the value, the culture ad
Yes.
instead of fit.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Because like all you want in your business is for it to grow and expand and be this like amazing thing. You don't want it to just stay the same because that's
Right.
like a small existence. So, adding people to your team that have different
Mm.
backgrounds is just so wonderful. Um, and then just making sure I think that you are treating everybody equally. And honestly, it could be from, you know, conversations to policies, like pay attention to the policies you have in place. I love to tell business owners that if you have one employee, you should have an employee handbook because
Mhm.
it's the guideline for your business. Not only are there a ton of things you have to be compliant with that should be in there, but also you get to model what your business looks like, what your practices are, who you are, and it puts into place like this structure for your team and you to operate around. I find that it helps business owners a lot when they're thinking about, oh, this person came to me with, time off or something along those lines. And I'm, a lot of people, when they first start leading, lead with their heart, not with, their brain
Mhm.
sometimes. And that could lead to inequalities without meaning to, right? With the
Sure.
best of intentions. And so sometimes having policies in place help you as a leader treat everybody fair.
Mhm. Yeah. I think, structure allows for freedom more than what we think automatically. Because when you think structure, like, you really think rigidity, but in reality, it lets you make the right decisions and the strategic decisions that organizations need to thrive. Um, I love the whole concept of, like, if you have one employee, you need to have a handbook. I think, one, it's a great practice for the employee, obviously,
Oh,
but
yeah.
I think it's a great practice for the leader because it forces you to think strategically about not just current situation of where your business is, but like you said earlier, like, most founders want their businesses to grow and be more than what the initial start and launch looks like. And by doing the work ahead of time, that allows you to think bigger and to
Hmm.
plan accordingly and then to make decisions that align with that strategic vision, which everything that you just said is all about strategy. It's all about, and I think you can lead with heart with strategy,
Absolutely.
but it does allow you to have a little bit of structure that allows you not to go off the rails. It basically, like when you're
Yeah.
bowling and you get the little bumper guide
Yes.
rails, like, that's what it helps with, you know?
Definitely. And I think that sometimes, you get yourself into trouble as a leader if early on, let's say your first employee, you're allowing them, all of these things that you wouldn't be able to provide to anybody else if they
Mm,
were hired. And so, while you want to be as wonderful and welcoming and inviting as possible, you have to think about, okay, if I am going to hire somebody else, I have to treat this person the exact same way.
yeah. I think that brings up a great point too, like we were talking about with capacity and energy, because your energy looks different towards one person than it does towards 10. And so you
Yes.
have to, I love that point about thinking more broad scale of, like, is this going to be sustainable
Hmm.
as the company and the business grows?
Yeah.
Mhm. Oh, such great insights. I'm loving it. Um, all right. So, actually, while we're talking about that, with like companies growing, businesses kind of scaling, what advice do you have for leaders who are trying to grow and scale their business with still maintaining their own mental, physical, social, everything well being?
Yeah. So I think that, you have to expect that there's going to be times where you are frazzled, you are busy. The goal is to not have that be a constant, right?
Yeah.
Like you're never going to be at 100% of feeling
Perfect.
free and yes. So, with growing and scaling, there does come times that, you're going to have a lot of work put on you to get your team to where they need to be. But the goal is always, it's not going to immediately solve the problem, but it will eventually. So even if you don't have team members that are directly tied to revenue, they are still going to free up your time so that you can focus on bigger, better. You could take some rest because your time is the most expensive.
Mm.
Um, I think it really comes down to being extremely thoughtful about what you need. So, what you need as a business. I love to just have like a note open on my computer. And as I'm going through my workday, jotting things down that I can delegate, right? I don't
Mhm.
need to be doing this. My time would be spent better elsewhere. And eventually, you're going to have a running list that will turn into a job description. So, from that brain dump, you could really go through and bucket them into categories. And that's how you determine what you need to hire for.
Mm.
So, I think it's a really important practice to be very thoughtful about where are the gaps in your team, what does the business need to move forward, and then you start to think about how to fill it. I actually am coming out with a new program next year. It's called the Team Framework, and I work with businesses to help them through growing pains. So, if we're at the stage where maybe you have a few employees, or maybe you have hundreds of employees, but you're going through growing pains, identifying the business needs, but then also assessing the current team you have, because the goal isn't to get rid of them and replace them. The goal is to find out where their, skill set and their goals can lend to your business needs. So, obviously it all works in this circular pattern, right? Like you need employees need a job, so the business has to be functioning and making money, but in order to do that you need the employees to be thriving and successful. So it's all hand in hand, right? There's one
Mhm.
is not better than the other. So identifying what your business needs and then figuring out, you know can I fit my employees there? Do they want to be in those places?
Mm.
Can we, upskill them? Is there education they can have? Do they have strengths that we're not aware of? And, maybe you do need to hire outside to fill those roles, but let's start with who you have first.
Mhm. I love that perspective. I really appreciate the tangible thing that somebody can do starting
Yeah,
now, like of taking notes. Like,
absolutely.
I'm a huge brain dumper too, but
Yeah.
never really thought about that. Like, I'm planning on staying a solopreneur for a while, but it's still a good idea because that even if you don't hire a team, there are still
Yeah.
ways to delegate or to automate or to figure out what's going to work for you. And I think it comes back to our conversation about energy too. Like,
Yes.
what tasks are you when you do that kind of energy audit? What tasks are draining you? What do you get gains from? I always call it the gains and drains. Like,
I love that.
where's this coming from to help you kind of figure out, like, what do you need to do yourself? What can others do? Or is it something that you can completely drop? Like, because,
Yeah,
a lot of us do stuff just because we think we have to,
absolutely.
and your business may
Absolutely.
not need it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you could really evaluate. And I think that's also sometimes it's really overwhelming and scary to think about. I'm going to sit down right now and figure out what my business needs. And it's like, then nothing comes out. You've forgotten everything you do.
You're like, what's my business?
Yeah, exactly. Like, who am I? So that's why I just like having the running list so that it really takes no time out of your day either. And you're not forcing yourself into a situation where you're not going to get the outcome you want because you're just not there.
Right. And it does make, when you get to the brainstorming phase, so much easier because you've already started and it's
Yep.
in the moment versus like like you said, just trying to spontaneously like come up with all these issues or things that sticky points for you. Well, yeah. So this is a great conversation, but I also want to respect time. But before I let you go, I have one last question that I ask
Yes.
everyone also on the podcast. And so, this podcast, the Balanced Badass podcast, is all about having some balanced living, but with badass results, because I firmly believe that you can be a balanced badass in life, in work, in everything. And so I'm curious, just from your perspective, how do you define being a balanced badass in your own life?
Ooh, that's such a tough question. How do I define being a balanced badass in my own life? Honestly, okay. So I said that I was in corporate for like 10 years and I've had my business, 2 going on third year. It's taken me a long time to decondition myself from,
Mm,
like here I am saying, figure out where you like during the day, how you work, when like that took me a full 2 years to figure out for myself. So, I think that since I've started doing that, I feel more confident, I feel more energized, and I'm honoring myself
mm,
so that I'm able to actually do good work for others, but then also do good work for myself, which frees me up to do things I wanna do, And so I don't I don't know if that exactly answers that question, but I feel like that's what's empowering to me in a way.
yeah.
Like being able to take control over my own time, understand myself and have it work for me as opposed to being told what I'm supposed to
Hmm.
be doing, how I'm supposed to be doing, and it's really empowering, I think.
Yeah. I love that ownership piece.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard. And it takes a while, right?
Oh,
Like
sure.
I'm saying all these things, giving all these tips. This does not mean that tomorrow you wake up and you're like, "Oh, I'm so balanced. I'm so, I am not burnt out." No, this takes time. Like we are conditioned in such a way where we have to be on all the time. We have to be doing things all the time. And I know from personal experience that when I am doing that, my work suffers, my
Hmm.
business suffers. And so I have proof that that doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
So, take a look at the proof, I feel like.
Yeah. And sometimes you need to revisit that proof on a regular basis,
Yes.
especially depending on like the season of life or, um, I came across like a friend of mine, she says like when a life bomb hits you, like
Oh,
that's a great moment to revisit the proof and to look at the conditioning that kind of might have led to that life bomb or might have shaken up your life in
yeah,
some way. So
yeah.
love that. Well, Kirsten, oh my gosh, thank you so much. This was so much fun.
This was so much fun.
We're totally gonna have to do this again.
I would
Um,
absolutely anytime. You let me know.
all right, tomorrow. No, just kidding.
Yeah.
Um, but anyways, I really do appreciate you sharing your insights. You have a just huge breadth of knowledge, and I can't wait to continue following your journey and to learn from you. You have so much to offer, and hopefully, our listeners really, like I said, there are definitely some pieces that I know for myself I'm going to be revisiting on this episode. But before we go, can you let our listeners know where can they find you? How can they connect with you and just learn more about the incredible work that you're doing?
Of course. So you can find me on Instagram and LinkedIn. So Instagram is KDZ _HR Consulting. LinkedIn is my name, Kirsten Zeigler, and I share a lot of educational tips, resources. I like to just help business owners. So if you're thinking, hey, maybe I don't need HR consulting services, but I want to pay attention to things that are going on, follow me in those places. You might find something that's helpful. I also have a bi-weekly newsletter through LinkedIn that you could sign up for. But I have a 3-month HR startup program that I run quarterly. So April will be a brand new session. It's for small business owners who are looking to hire their first employee, or maybe you have a small team and you're looking for how to actually hire correctly or how to lead correctly. We dive into hiring, onboarding, interviewing, compliance, and then leadership through the first 90 days. So that's really good, again, for small business owners who have like a small team or are looking to hire their first employees. I also offer hourly consulting services. And then my team framework, which I talked about earlier, will be launching next year for those experiencing growing pains, and really, really excited to start working on that.
Awesome. Can't wait to learn more about that too. I love frameworks. I'm a huge fan. And once again, that goes back to the structure thing. I think that has something to do with my type A personality. I don't know. But I'll make sure to have everything linked in the show notes so that way listeners can revisit and check you out and connect with you on all the things and with all the things. So listeners, folks, friends, if you enjoyed today's episode, I would really appreciate if you did me a favor and share it with a friend who could just use a little extra balance in their life. And don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes and future guest interviews. Also, if you really enjoyed our time together and want to show Kirsten and I a little bit of extra love, reviews are always welcome too. They really help us spread the balanced badassery far and wide, and that is my ultimate mission. So as always, remember to stay balanced, stay badass, and make good choices, friend. We'll be back next week with another episode. See you then.
Thanks for hanging out with me on the Balanced Badass podcast. I hope today's episode brought you a little more balance and a lot more badass in your day. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, share it with a friend, and leave a review. Your support helps more multitaskers like you find the show, and I'd really appreciate it. Until next time, take care of yourself and make good choices, friend. I'll catch you next week.